Welcome into the latest edition of City Cost, where I take a look back at the week's news from Japan from this foreigner's perspective. And just to be clear, whilst the news is real, all the opinions are my own. Feel free to leave yours at the end of the video. This week, character Rei picked as kanji best describing social mood in Japan. Japan given second fossil award over no change in coal push. Tokyo District Court orders government to pay damages to transgender official for imposing restrictions on their use of women's toilets. City of Kawasaki passes Japan's first ordinance imposing criminal penalties for hate speech. 9-year-old makes record by passing college-level math test. So on Thursday, the kanji of the year for 2019 was announced as being Rei. Rei coming from the word Reiwa, which is the name of the new era that Japan entered into in May this year. Now, the kanji of the year has been going on since 1995, and it's selected by a poll done by the Japan Kanji Aptitude Testing Foundation. This year they polled over 200,000 people, over 30,000 of which voted for or picked out Rei as being the kanji that best reflects the mood in Japan in 2019. Now, picking Rei as the kanji Rei itself actually means, what does it mean? It means order, command, or auspicious. Put together in Reiwa, the name was translated as beautiful harmony. Now, picking Rei as the kanji of the year strikes me as being, well, sinfully boring, to be quite honest with you. I'm not entirely sure that Rei itself comes up with some kind of sense of atmosphere or mood in the country, particularly when you think that this year we saw perhaps one of the largest typhoons to make landfall on the mainland of Japan since records began. That was back in October, Typhoon Hagibis. And at the same time, we also had the Rugby World Cup, when Japan's Brave Blossoms, the rugby team, managed to get through to the best 8 of the tournament for the first time in their history. Anyway, Rei has been picked as the kanji of the year for 2019. And I suppose it sort of brings a bit of diversity to things when we think that last year, in 2018, it was the kanji Sai, which reflects disaster, that was picked as the kanji of the year. And also, when we go back to the start in 1995, I'll just check again, it was the kanji Shin, which means quake or shiver, to reflect the fears of the Great Hanshin earthquake that occurred in that year, and also the sarin gas attacks in Tokyo. Anyway, this year's kanji was Rei, and as by tradition, it was written in big calligraphy outside Kiyomizudera Temple in Kyoto. What was your kanji of the year for 2019? Be sure to let us know in the comments. So the next story I've picked up this week is actually coming out of the UN Climate Change Conference in Madrid. And this story came out on Wednesday. Japan was given another Fossil of the Day award by NGO Climate Action Network. And this comes after Japan's Environment Minister, Shinjiro Koizumi, failed to share any new developments on Japan's increasing use of coal and export of coal as an energy source, export of coal power as an energy source. Now, this was their second fossil award. The first fossil award came the day earlier when Mr. Hiroshi Kajiyama, who was the Minister of Industry, again, didn't give any kind of, didn't back down on Japan's stance of exporting coal power as a source of power for developing nations. Now, to be fair to Koizumi, he did tell reporters after being awarded the fossil that it was no surprise. He admitted, he seemed to have admitted that he failed in his attempts to review Tokyo's position on promoting exports of coal-fired power plants to developing companies. He said, I quote, "I wanted to do something about exports, but failed to present a new stance. We will continue discussions on the matter." Now, Koizumi did point out actually that Tokyo, Japan, has reduced greenhouse gas emissions for 5 years in a row, and he made the claim that only 2 countries, Japan and Britain, among the group of G7 nations, have been able to do that. Now, I sort of bring this up because whilst the conference itself is happening in Madrid, it seems to me that for foreigners living in Japan who want to kind of somehow contribute to the sustainable life, to the reduction of greenhouse emissions and to tackle climate change, I wonder perhaps if there is enough information about how they can do that in Japan. For example, back in, I think it was the 1st of November, we entered into this warm biz period. Now this comes on the back of Japan's cool biz period, where we sort of reduce our reliance on power by, I don't know, taking off our ties at work or something like that. Anyway, the warm biz campaign, I wonder perhaps if knowledge about this campaign is as widespread as the cool biz campaign. And if you research it and you go onto the sort of official page, you'll come to this cool choice page, which comes from the Japan's government, offering all kinds of advice about how to live the sustainable life, about the sensible choices that we can make here in Japan to help combat climate change. Now, the thing is, all of this stuff is in Japanese. And whilst obviously there's nothing wrong with that, and they're perhaps under no sort of moral obligation to put this stuff in English, I don't know, I kind of feel like it might be nice if there was a bit more of an effort to reach out to the foreign community in Japan and to help them get on board with living sustainably. So if you've got any suggestions on how to do that, again, stick them in the comments in below. Going back to Shinjiro Koizumi, well, he hit headlines back in, I think it was October, when he gave a press conference in New York, and he referred to the challenge of tackling climate change as sexy. Yes, he said the word sexy, talking about climate change. Now, Shinjiro Koizumi, if you don't know, is the son of a former Prime Minister, Junichiro Koizumi, and he's sort of pinned about as this pin-up poster boy politician who's, well, if you ask my Japanese friends, he's a dead cert to become the next Prime Minister, or not the next Prime Minister, but a Prime Minister in the future. Anyway, he's the current Environment Minister, and like I said, he referred to tackling climate change, or one of the methods of tackling climate change, as having to be sexy. Quite what that means, we're not entirely sure, but at least he's bringing a bit of colour and interest to the world of politics. Okay, my next pick I picked up on, this comes from Thursday's news, and it was the story about the Tokyo District Court ordering the government to pay damages to a transgender official for imposing restrictions on their use of women's toilets at their place of work. The court ordered the state to pay around 1.32 million yen in compensation or in damages to the victim. Now, the official in question, who works at the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, was born as a man but has been living their life as a woman. She was told to use toilets, well, she was told to use the disabled booth toilets, or to use women's toilets, female toilets, some distance away from what would appear to have been the most convenient women's toilets to use close to her office, or wherever, the desk where she was working. And this comes on the back of voices of concern from female colleagues. Now, in terms of policy, it seems like the ministry actually doesn't restrict toilet use for those who have changed their gender on Japan's census register. But in order to actually officially change your gender on the register, it seems like maybe you need to undergo a sex change, which the victim in this case hadn't undergone due to health issues. Now, actually, this story comes back on the back of some reports that came out this week of a recent survey in Japan conducted by Japan LGB Research Institute, which showed that 90% of respondents to the survey were familiar with the term LGBT, but that only 57.1% of them actually correctly understood its meaning. The Institute said another online survey conducted at the same time, or around the same months, on over 400,000 people aged 20 to 69, found that 10% of the people who gave valid responses to the survey identify themselves as LGBT or another sexual minority. Obviously, well, perhaps not obviously, I don't know, but over recent years, I would say, the awareness of the LGBT struggle, LGBT needs and their rights has been coming to the fore in Japan, I think. And we've seen municipalities, a number of municipalities around Japan, issuing sort of same-sex marriage certificates, which, as far as I understand it, are not sort of legal and binding documents. But it seems to me that they're a step in the right direction towards giving LGBT and sexual minority couples the kind of recognition that they deserve. Full story this week, the city of Kawasaki in Kanagawa Prefecture, that's just near Tokyo, they have passed Japan's first ordinance imposing criminal penalties for hate speech. And this news came out on Thursday. The new ordinance is plans to come into effect from July 1st, 2020. And what it does is well, I'm just going to read this because it's a bit of a tongue twister. It bans discriminatory language and actions against those from countries or regions other than Japan in public spaces. Repeat violations are going to be punishable by a fine of up to 500,000 yen. Now, according to, well, this is a quote from Kawasaki Mayor Norihiko Fukuda. He said, "Now we have an ordinance with great effectiveness that suits the local situation," which, when I read that, suggests to me that Kawasaki has perhaps had some issues with hate speech in the past. Now, we do know that Kawasaki has one of the largest Korean communities in Japan, I believe. And so maybe, they're obviously introducing this ordinance because, well, not based on nothing, one would have thought. It seems that some people may have been victims of hate speech in that city. Now, a civic group of Korean residents of Japan said that they welcomed the ordinance, and what the ordinance also does is it kind of gives specific examples as to what the city of Kawasaki is trying to stamp out. Now, according to the reports, these include calling for minorities to be expelled from where they live, encouraging physical attacks against them, likening them to something other than human. I don't know, have you guys ever experienced any hate speech? Certainly as a foreigner living in Japan, I think you're susceptible to all kinds of discrimination, whether that's just born from ignorance or whether it's a kind of active, intentional discrimination. But certainly, foreigners living in Japan are vulnerable to this sort of thing. Now, quite what constitutes hate speech, I'm not entirely sure, and I wouldn't even know what hate speech sounds like in Japanese. That's beyond my Japanese level, I would have thought. But this is always comes into that issue of free speech. What is free speech? Is this a step down the direction to a kind of Big Brother situation where we have to be careful what we say in any situation? But they did say that this ordinance is to take effect from concentrating on public spaces. Again, the issue of free speech is always likely to bring up polarizing opinions, but certainly the stamping out of hate seems to me to be nothing but a good thing anyway. So let's see how that plays out. As I said, the reports are saying that that ordinance will come into effect from July 1st, 2020. And we're going to finish off this week's news with something, well, perhaps a little bit lighter compared to the other stuff we've covered. And it's about a 9-year-old boy in Western Japan who has passed a maths exam a maths exam test, a maths test, which is equivalent to a college level graduate exam. Now this boy is only 9 years old and he has become the youngest ever to do so, according to the test organizer. He's a 4th year elementary school student in Nishinomiya, and that's in Hyogo Prefecture, and he passed Tsuken's top level Ikkyu, that's level 1 test in October, which is issued by the Mathematics Certification Institute of Japan. The previous record was held by an 11-year-old, and yeah, well, I don't know, that makes me kind of makes me feel a bit stupid, really. But it does also remind me that the JLPT, the Japanese Language Proficiency Test, was held, I think, was this month. And so I guess maybe results for that are coming out in February next year. So if you took the JLPT this year, hope it went okay. Good luck for your results coming out in February. That's it for my look back on the week's news from Japan. If you've got any comments, any opinions of your own, please let us know in the comments below this video. If there's any news that you feel like we missed out on, or I missed out on this week, again, drop that into the comments below the video. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.